Welcome to this edition of the MDM podcast. I'm Tom Gale with Modern Distribution Management. Artificial intelligence. For those of us who have covered wholesale distribution technology for any length of time, it carries a combination of hype, hope, promise, peril, and a thesaurus full of descriptors. Like many, I've been soaking up as much as I can through podcasts, research, articles, blogs, Substacks, trying to get a foothold, or maybe a better term is fingerhold at this point, for a little stability and context for the ways in which AI is impacting wholesale distribution and broader supply chain channels and where it's going. So I'm delighted today to welcome Justin King, who is the Global Director and Principal Analyst for the B2B eCommerce Association and a longtime technology analyst and evangelist for technology specific to wholesale distribution. He's the author of Digital Branch Secrets, an e-commerce playbook for distributors, published in 2018, and has been a contributor to MDM for many years as a contributing writer as well as a speaker at MDM conferences. He speaks at many distribution association events on digital innovation and strategy, and will be a speaker at MDM's 2024 Shift Conference, September 11th to 13th in Denver, Colorado. Justin, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here again with you, Tom.
I've been really interested to have this conversation today with you. And what I'd like to try to get to is both some of the higher level strategic aspects of this, but I'd really love to also cut through some of the hype cycle and noise that's out there to really help all of us think a little bit more precisely about both the short-term and longer-term impacts of how AI is being deployed, being thought of, and really sort of what that roadmap looks like here over the next several years, Justin. I couldn't think of a better person to have that conversation with today. So let's start at this place. And I've heard you say before that AI has, it's not really a new thing. It's been around. And, if you look at some of the, this goes back decades in some cases in terms of the iterations and the journey that it's been on, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not new. I think there's some reasons we can talk about why AI is so, prevalent in the news. I was just at B2B Online last week, Tom, and everybody's tagline had something to do with AI. Of course,
right.
That was going to happen. But there's a question of why in 2024 is that the case? But the reality is that AI has been a part of actually our individual personal lives for a long time now. Anytime you go on YouTube and it suggests video, that's AI. When Gmail, I love this feature of Gmail, when it finishes your sentence or it suggests, hey, you had 2 or 3 people to the list and it says, hey, would you like to add these people as well? Facebook targets you with ads. Spotify learns the music you love. TikTok personalizes the For You page if you're a TikTok guy. Tom, I'm a TikTok guy.
Not me.
With my 4 daughters, I'm a TikTok guy. Amazon, Netflix recommends shows and movies. I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? Zoom, in the platform we're doing today, it automatically transcribes our recorded meetings for us. And then, social media and business social media like LinkedIn, it curates the homepage and recommends different connections to you. This is all AI, and AI is this like very broad category of technology. It's really, the definition is just automating what the computer does for you. And so AI is this very, very broad category that includes a couple things. One is machine learning. Much of what I just talked about was machine learning. We've heard the words machine learning. I think 5 years ago, everybody's tagline showed machine learning in their taglines. Now it's just kind of shifted to the broad AI, but machine learning has been a part of our, lives for a long time now. Even I think it's 1997, Watson beat, a chess, was the first time a computer beat a human at chess in 1997. So it's been a part. But I think the hype cycle today is really around some new things that have been, released to the public. And I think even probably more so, Tom, it's been commercialized and made available to the public, right? So all of a sudden, it's not just for computer programmers and developers. Now we have technology that's out there that allows you and I, as non-technical people, to be able to access some of this technology. And that has started to, that's created, the volume of opportunities out there by using AI.
Yeah. If you go back into ancient history of technology and distribution, back to again, I'll refer to this as I have in the past, but Granger, deploying CD-ROMs in the 1990s for putting their catalog on, and all of a sudden there was a huge hype cycle and craze and a bit of a gold rush for people getting their CD-ROMs and their catalogs digitized at that point, and then of course we entered the .com and the internet explosion. So my question to you is what's different this time? Why is there so much more magical dust around AI in 2024, even though we've been going through iterations of this? And I mean, my first thought is you just touched on this, but it was, unlike the internet and sort of previous technology cycles, there's that statistic out there about once the Chat GPT, the initial version was released, it was actually like a week before 1 million people were actually subscribers, adopters of
Right.
it. So is it just a matter of sort of our acceleration of what our access is to digital at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, if you look at technology in general, I mean, the automobile, I think, took 20 years for the automobile to be adopted in every home, to have maybe longer than that, 30 years for every home to have the automobile. The internet, was started in the late 80s and 90s, and it wasn't until the early 2000s that we actually saw, the broad adoption of it, because the tools were given to the people like us, right?
Yeah.
And this is the same thing. I think ChatGPT is interesting. ChatGPT is a different kind of AI, and unfortunately, it's been correlated to what AI is, but it's not. We've already established AI as this kind of broad category that includes things like machine learning, but it also includes this new thing called generative AI. And really, that's what ChatGPT is, generative AI.
Right.
Generative AI is the ability to create something from nothing, right? It's something, it's not something from nothing. That's creation. This is the ability to create something brand new that's never been seen before. And that's, I mean, that's a very exciting, and it was made for mass consumption, right? So ChatGPT, you can access it for free, or you can pay $20 a month and get a premium version. But generative AI actually uses logic, machine learning logic, and decision making to learn, adjust, reason, and self-correct over time. But it focuses on creating something new content, new writing, new images, new video, and even music. I was using a thing called, I think it's called Suno yesterday, or Sumo yesterday, that I was creating for a podcast. So I was creating a intro for my podcast. So I actually put in, this is going to be about Justin King and B2B commerce and AI, and it created a song for me using a voice about Justin King's amazing B2B commerce. I mean, it's kind of silly, but that's just incredible. So this idea of generative AI is creating something from new. And a great example is Midjourney. Midjourney is a graphics generative AI, and it now has the ability to create photorealistic AI images of people, of places that don't exist. These people don't exist. These places don't exist. My father's a designer, a graphic designer. He's in his late 60s, and he uses Midjourney to build his base graphics just by a text prompt. He actually created he's really big into pickleball, and he created this whole pickleball website with people wearing his shirts that he's created. And the people don't exist. They're created in Midjourney. And that's really the new hype cycle around generative AI. But I think there's lots of interesting, just like we see AI in our daily lives already, I think we're watching AI be rolled out in business context as well, inside of distribution, inside of manufacturing as well.
So I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here because
Yeah,
I
please.
I absolutely, and there's two sides to this actually, because I think one of the real powers of, and you just articulated it, one of the real powers of Gen AI is this capacity for creativity in terms of taking a lot of different elements that we can't access individually, but really being able to assimilate, aggregate, bring together so much more knowledge and data, and then produce something new out of it. And we're getting some hallucinations. That's an element of it, right?
Mhm.
But at one level, I think that's okay, because that's kind of a sign of if it just kind of spat back at you, kind of what is already out there, then it's not really groundbreaking, right? It's just kind of,
Right.
it's just echoing, and it's, this isn't about echoing. So I think that kind of hallucination piece, it gets scary and it's dangerous in some ways, but there's also an element of creativity in terms of, well, that's probably should be his job, because if you think about any kind of process about people creating new things, there's an element of this creativity piece that is really an important part. The flip side of that to me is I think there's also a story around Gen AI, and the use of Chat GPT has kind of elevated the levels of mediocrity, because I think there's, some people will take it and then they'll just take whatever it spits back out and then use that as kind of the final product. To me, the real power of it, and you just outlined that for professionals like your dad. I mean, for our MDM team, it's the same thing. I mean, we're all about, market research, content, and how we communicate. And it's really valuable for creating outlines and bringing in concepts and saying, and testing and saying, hey, maybe we haven't thought about everything here as we try to explore a certain subject or create a conference agenda, things like that. But it really puts something out there. And then I think there's that final 20% where you can bring your own original thought and perspectives that are more experiential based and specific, that can really then elevate the whole Gen AI. I probably went deeper than we really needed to,
No,
but
it's
I get on a soapbox when we get into this.
I mean, there's a couple aspects of what you're saying. I mean, yesterday I was watching Netflix and it recommended after the, show I was watching that we think you would like this. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it. It wasn't was not along my taste, right? Meaning it was wrong. It didn't know me. It didn't know what I really like. I think there's an element of this, Tom, and both of you and I are pragmatists here, especially when it comes to practical uses inside of distribution. There's an element of use this for scale and efficiency, but don't use it blindly, right?
Right.
The famous story is those attorneys that turned in a brief and ChatGPT had actually made up case law for them and they just blindly believed it and turned it in, right?
Right. Right.
That's silly, right? That's silly to do that. This is the test I would use for any technology, right? Is this is a chance to learn and adapt and understand and find areas of efficiency and scale, but it's not the time to trust blindly what technology is telling you is right or wrong or a decision to make or not a decision to make. And so I think we've got to put this in the right category of this is not a saving technology for our business. This is a business that's going to help us be efficient. I think the same applies for people is I don't see technology necessarily replacing jobs, although it will, as much as I see people that know how to use this technology replace jobs, right? And I mean, this is I mean, we can go back to digital e-commerce, we can go back to CD-ROMs, we can go back to phone and fax, those individuals that learned how to embrace that technology and use that technology inside of their business, they were elevated inside of their organizations and went on to do amazing things versus the people that said, we're not going to use it. I mean, I still think the percentages of ChatGPT use on a daily basis are very, very low,
Yeah.
just a
And
couple percentage points.
yeah, and I agree 100%. I think the other element of this is not only is it an enabler of, in terms of efficiency, but I really think, particularly with all of the kind of incredibly disruptive pace of change and everything else that the marketplace, our economy, our world is in, that going forward, it's a critical tool for businesses to not only optimize their efficiency going forward, but also really to enable their ability to innovate, which is a critical business skill going forward as well. And so I'm very positive about it. I agree. I think we're really close in terms of being very pragmatic about it, but I'm also very optimistic, particularly in longer term, of how this really is going to elevate businesses' capabilities to, in fact, differentiate more effectively going forward in all the noise that's out there.
Yeah. Well, I've been able, personally, I've been able to do things incredibly fast. Even simple things like analyze an Excel spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
I was able to upload a spreadsheet. I was able to analyze it. I did a PowerPoint presentation where I said, would you create a PowerPoint presentation based off of these core ideas? They were my ideas, by the way, these core ideas, and then give me the VBA script, which is just like the Microsoft script to actually create the PowerPoint. And it did it. And I created a PowerPoint deck that would have taken me, 6 to 8 hours. It created in just a few minutes. I think there's significant opportunities that don't have to be about some of these risky areas to be able
Yep.
to use it and see a ton of value. And Tom, I mean, maybe the main point I'm making to your audience here, and if I was talking to a CEO, I would say, have your people be experimenting and using this technology for the benefit of the organization and the efficiency that you'll get out of it. And you can do that without even touching risky areas inside of your business.
Yeah. And that's a great launching point for us, I think, to get a little bit deeper in terms of the power of this customization, actually, in individual customization of AI and some specific use cases that you're seeing in B2B today. So let's dive in. I mean, we talked before a little bit, you take a look across the different functional areas of a distributor. I'm really interested in terms of what you're seeing across some of these functional areas where you're really seeing some cool deployment.
I have 4 or 5 examples I'm going to bring up here, and these are just amazing examples. The first one, and these are all inside of distribution. The first one is something that I think we can make the mental leap to. If you've used ChatGPT, I think you can make the mental leap, and that is that there's a building material distributor that is using Gen AI to create personalized marketing emails to their customers, but it digests the customer attributes like who they are, their location, the type of company and industry that they're in, and creates a custom email to them. Now, if you've ever used ChatGPT, you will know that sometimes the things it says is not the tone and voice that a normal human would speak in, right? So what they've done is they've actually customized this to their own brand voice. For example, when I write a post, I'll say something like, I'll actually use my book and say, use the same tone and voice that I wrote these emails in, or I wrote my book in. And then when it writes, it sounds so much more like me than a standard ChatGPT. So this company is actually using it to create personalized emails. Instead of mass emails, these are personalized emails, all in the appropriate brand voice. I like that one, Tom. I feel like everybody can make the mental leap to. It's also something that would most likely be driven by a technology team, a marketing team, a digital team. And so I think we can kind of wrap our head around. The next couple, I think, become ones that our jaws kind of start to drop, and you start thinking about, okay, these are interesting use cases. The next one I have is there's an industrial distributor that actually uses Gen AI, something like ChatGPT. It's not ChatGPT, but it's something like ChatGPT. It's a private one for the screening of their supplier bid documentation. So, I mean, everybody understands this, that when you're trying to get a new supplier, their supplier is doing a bid, to supply that new product to you. You're typically sending it out to 2 or 3 different suppliers. You've got all this documentation. There's way too much documentation. Who wants to read all that documentation? And they are actually using Gen AI to summarize and allocate points of the supplier bid documentation, compare the bids to other bids, draw the pros and cons, and it makes this decision-making process so significantly easier. I was looking at some legal documentation yesterday, and I pointed Gen AI to it and said, "Hey, read this, and then I have a bunch of questions to ask you about this legal documentation," right? And I then, asked it a bunch of questions based off of, I said, use only this documentation here. And I asked it a bunch of questions and I validated the answers after I was done. It's a similar concept, but this is someone that's in the supplier organization that said, hey, how do we make this process better and faster?
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of sounds a little bit like essentially like lead scoring for prospects, right? In
Yeah.
terms of what what the kind of on the reverse side in terms of pointing in the direction of suppliers in terms of really streamlining and qualifying and taking a lot of the out of the trench work out of it.
Yeah, I think the results, Tom, were 90% reduction in the time it takes to review supplier bid
Huh, yeah,
documentation, a 2 month
interesting.
acceleration on from tender to project. I think that's a great ROI on it.
Yeah. Well, I had a thought actually back on the first one around the building material distributor creating that, and the question I had was you were able to train the model on your book, and that's a lot of content and a lot of data
Hmm.
to work with. What are the kinds of things that a building material or any kind of distributor could use to actually train ChatGPT or another model
Yeah.
to actually learn its voice, to kind of customize that messaging that makes it sound like the voice of that distributor and brand of that distributor?
I mean, a simple way to do it is to feed it your website and say, hey, read my website, how I position myself, how I talk about my organization, our about us pages, right? And learn some of the history and the words that we use to describe who we are. One of the things I say is, would you then give me a prompt that I can use next time I'm writing to make sure it's writing in that tone? It'll say, hey, your website is written in the conversational yet informative tone of a building distributor in this, in the Midwest. It will do much better than trying to come up with a prompt on your own. That's just the best. I mean, I've done, I fed in my YouTube transcripts, my emails that I've written, and it first of all says, "Man, you're a bad writer." And then it says, "We can also create something that looks like a bad writer." So
I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, I'm not going to look to Gen AI for
valuation,
reinforcement of
valuation of your own.
yeah, yeah, that's a little scary. Um, okay, so thanks. That really helps me to think a little bit more around how somebody can train it because, yeah, I mean, a combination of training videos, mission statements. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be fed in there and what that looks like. And before we, before we finish our conversation today, I want to talk about security because there's elements in terms of what that looks like in terms of deploying too. So, but I want to go through a couple more of these very specific use cases because it's really helpful for me to wrap my head around.
I think there's two others that I think are fascinating. One is around inventory management. So there's a large semiconductor distributor that struggles with the classification of products in tariff codes. So if tariff codes, when you're trying to ship internationally, you have to assign a specific tariff code. The tariff codes have lots of regulatory language around what the tariff code should apply to. And this company applied, they fed in the tariff language, the tariff code language into a large language model, LLM. That's just kind of the business logic that exists inside of a chat GPT, an LLM, large language model. And they harmonized, it's called the harmonized tariff schedule codes. That's the official language of this language. And they were able to assign tariff codes to millions of SKUs. By the way, that typically took someone actually reading through the tariff documentation to make sure it was a sign. It started at 95% accuracy, which sounds pretty bad, right? Because if you have 5% of your SKUs and you have millions of SKUs, I mean, that's not a great percentage. By the way, the human error percentage was about 13%. So humans would make an error of 13%. ChatGPT or whatever, I don't know. This wasn't ChatGPT, but it was a privatized ChatGPT that had a 5% error rate. They trained it, made it better, and now it's running at a 1 to 2% error rate.
Oh, that's
It's
incredible.
incredible.
Actually, for the MDM analytics part of our business, we work a lot with the import export that are very closely related to the harmonized tariff schedules as well. So it's incredibly minutia oriented. So
Yes.
that's a great example of a large lift made much easier.
The last one I'll share is, I have others, but the last one also just a fascinating one in logistics. So you have a large industrial distributor that is using Gen AI to actually reduce their shipment lead times. And they're doing that by managing and analyzing all of the shipping documentation. So when I say reduce lead times, you would automatically kind of think, oh, it's doing some analysis on the data. No, they're actually using it to analyze the shipping documentation. And shipping documentation often is, again, very robust and sometimes dozens, hundreds, or thousands of pages to go off, especially if you're shipping overseas on a cargo ship. And they're able to identify, AI is able to identify proactively the missing documents that it needs, again, by reading, they fed the LLM, the shipping regulatory guidelines. I don't know what those are called. And Gen AI is able to find the missing documentation and then be able to propose actions to actually fix those problems and issues. I think 90 to 95% of trade documentation is not automated today. It's very, very manual. They were actually able to reduce the lead time by 60%. I mean, that's a big, I mean, most companies are trying to reduce lead times by, single digits, right? And if you get to 10%, you're good. This reduced lead times by 60%, which is pretty fascinating. So I think what those represent is an interesting use of AI that really is not about creating images and videos and kind of typical things you're thinking about. They are companies thinking very strategically about how we use technology inside of our organizations to make us more efficient. And then the ROI for these are, significantly overbalanced towards the positive for all these use cases.
And the examples that you use really connects in terms of the whole challenge that distributors have had, as well as with their suppliers, around data and communication and taxonomy, all of the pieces. Talk a little bit about your perspective around sort of where the real power of AI can help as far as the automation that you just mentioned as well.
Yeah, I think we have to back into another concept there, Tom, which is, if you think about all those use cases, that was not the digital team doing a bunch of work, right? That was the VP of supply chain. I don't know who they were in this. I do know the customers, but I don't remember. I don't have the titles of those individuals, but those are leaders inside of their organizations thinking about, how do we make our processes more efficient? How do we use technology to do that? AI just happened to be the vehicle by which those were implemented. And, we had new technology that maybe wasn't available 3 years ago if those concepts were thought through. And we really see significant innovation when the leaders are actually taking this digital transformation on their own, and they're thinking through, how do we use technology to make our process more efficient? But actually, they're probably not even doing that. They're probably saying, hey, this is a process that's not efficient today. Can we brainstorm ways of reducing the lead times on these activities, and then coming up with a strategy. And by the way, then the digital and technology teams are able to come behind those strategies and help those companies implement. I just see the future is so rich. I think these use cases that we're seeing, and Tom, you and I were talking about before this about this, I think these use cases are scratching the surface. I think these use cases will be outdated in 12 months, and I think they're incredible use cases, but I think they'll all be outdated in 12 months because there will be bigger and better things out there.
Yeah. So I think at the core, and what I'm taking away from your comments is this is today, the examples that you just shared, a lot of this is oriented around product data.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
and it's fundamentally around the age-old issue of data management, which is not new. It's been a critical challenge, and particularly as channels have gotten more complex from traditional sales channels, outside sales channels, to more hybrid sales channels, bringing in the digital components as well, and marketplaces and all the other permutations that have been taking place and that you've spent your life analyzing and advising on for the last decade plus. And again, this comes back to my own orientation and passion around data analytics and distribution. And it's really, it seems like everybody's at this different level of this data analytics journey, the data management challenges. It absolutely focuses more internally and operationally, but I think we're also seeing, and when you talk about the future, it's also going to be much more deeply around applying this automation and the kind of the creativity that AI can bring into customer data as well as supplier data, the whole supply chain transparency aspects of where this is going to take this in the future. And that's where my mind starts to kind of blow up in terms of there's so many other, things that can evolve out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you wrote an article not too long ago about how data analytics is kind of the fuel for AI. And frankly, I mean, this is not nothing new.
Right.
Most of the new technologies that we, will have available to us now and then in the future, data is at the foundation of that. And so, and by the way, it's not just data, it's knowledge, it's industry knowledge, application knowledge. So the deeper your digitizing of content and knowledge and data is, the more you're going to have the ability to take advantage. I mean, ChatGPT and LLM, the large language model, has to be trained on something, right? And so it can be trained on what's out there, or it can be trained on something very specific, like your company's information, your company's products, your company's solutions and applications and industries that you deal in. And that starts with being able to digitize content. And if there's any next step to walk people through, it's actually a statement that I have been making for over 10 years, which is data is not a project, it's a program. Data is not a project, it's a program, meaning there's no start date, there's no end date, there's just continuous improvement. There's getting better every single day, every single week, every single month, every quarter, every year, making improvements on it and making it deeper and richer. And that will give you the foundation by which to apply some of these new technologies. And by the way, that's like, I would say the same thing if I was talking to you about e-commerce.
Mhm.
I'd say the same thing as if I was talking to you about sales tools for your reps and customer service. And I'm saying the same thing about AI. We're just, this whole AI thing has really deepened this need for really, really rich data and content. And again, not just data and content, but knowledge and application of the products. Your salespeople have unique knowledge that say this product, while it's meant for this, it also does this really cool thing on this over here. Can you extract that from their heads and digitize that in some way? And that's where the program comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the real development over the next few years. And it's people are working on that today.
Absolutely.
So I want to touch on, before we wrap our conversation, on a couple of the risk and security type
Mhm.
issues. What are your thoughts around sort of where we are as far as the security issues? And you talked a little bit about people. I mean, it's one thing to go ask a learning model, a language learning model, to read your website. It's another if you start to share your internal information and say, hey, take a look at the last 3 years of my transactions with my customers. You start to get into much deeper issues, incredible potential in terms of its analysis and what that looks like. But talk a little bit about the firewalls and how you're thinking about security on this.
I mean, I think, in something that I'm doing, ChatGPT, writing an email, I guess there's even a question depending on the level of the email that I'm writing, whether I should be feeding into something like ChatGPT. For most kind of personal use cases, it's fine. When you start thinking about a business, and building your own large language model or a LLM, you're talking about feeding it mission critical information about your business, about your products, about your customers. We get into areas of indemnification. And in those cases, I encourage everyone to start thinking through and drawing some lines about what needs to be private GPTs, if that's a way to say that, private GPTs versus public. Chat GPT is a public GPT, Gemini is a public GPT. But there's quite a few that allow you to partition off your data and your knowledge from the central. So the central can't access the partition data. And then you can allow the partition data access the public data, but we'll give you that kind of security, just like you would. I mean, I wouldn't, really is not much different than a database, right? If you're using a public database, would you put all your information in a public database? No, you wouldn't. You would partition it off and make sure it's secure and added. So I don't really think you need to think that much differently about this. I think it is smart for people to write some guidelines to their employees about how they should be using it, what information can and is allowed to go into a ChatGPT versus what's not allowed. I think it makes sense to draw some lines on that. And by the way, you can actually ask ChatGPT to write a AI employee agreement for you that will outline what's good and what's bad to put into ChatGPT, and it won't be biased either. It'll tell you real good things, and it's a very simple way of doing that.
I'd like to finish up with this. You think about the future of where this is going over the next few years, but absolutely connecting it to the next few months. As you talk about this with executives, how are you framing this in terms of what should I be thinking about next and what should I be doing next to keep building the capabilities or making sure, am I really leveraging the capabilities and thinking about this in the right way? What's your answer to that?
I think there's a very easy way to start here, and that's all of the vendors that you're talking to, all your technology vendors, whether it's ERP or e-commerce or website or marketing, all the vendors are thinking through their own AI strategy and will be 100%, not may, they 100% will be incorporating AI into their products, and you'll be able to take advantage of that. And I think that's just a beautiful way to start, right? It's a closed environment. You can talk to them about security. You can figure out, where their own firewalls are drawn. And then it allows you to take advantage of AI without having to leave the current environments that you're in, right? I mean, I think, if you're still on a green screen ERP, probably not going to see AI anytime soon. But most of the tools you will. I mean, we're seeing it Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Google Docs have all incorporated in, right? So that's an easy way of taking advantage of it. I still believe it's less about the technology part as it is the mentality of, as an organization, are your leaders thinking through their own digital transformation strategies? And if they are, that inventory and that tariff classification, that shipping all came from not the digital team, it was from those leaders. And my biggest push to a CEO is push the responsibility of digital transformation inside of your organization to your leaders, not your digital team, not your innovation team. Their job is to help you execute and optimize the strategy. Their job is not to come up with the digital strategy for finance or the digital strategy for supply chain. I think that shift in thinking, what it starts to do is you start to brainstorm inside of a very specific department like supply chain or even finances, you start to find lots of manual activities that happen inside of your organization that might be a good use case for something like AI. And the quickest way to get there is to leverage all the leaders in your organization. However, most companies relegate digital transformation. I mean, there's digital transformation departments inside of companies. Is it the job of digital transformation department that doesn't know your company as well to do that? Or is it the job of the leaders? I would argue that the companies that are doing this most successfully are leaders in every one of those organizations. It's the same thing of how I talk about how customers should be at the center of what you're doing. You need every department head thinking about the customer as they're designing a new process or trying to make something more efficient. I think I'll end with this, Tom, and that is that I believe we're at the very, very beginning of this. We are not midway through. We are at the very, very beginning of this, which means that everything that we're talking about today will rapidly change in the next 12 months. And you don't need to stay up on all the new features and functionality that are out there. But I would encourage everyone to quarterly or every 6 months or something on a regular basis to have someone be able to speak, here's a great example on the MDM podcast to speak about what the technologies are out there that are doing and what changes that we've seen in the last 12 months. I think it would be incredibly beneficial to at least stay up on what other companies are doing and how they're utilizing it.
And that is a great place to end this conversation, but we will be having many more, including you will be expanding on digital transformation strategy at our Shift conference. Very much looking forward to that. And AI will be very much a part of and woven into very much our Shift conference in the fall as well. So with that, Justin, thanks so much. You always push my thinking and love our conversations. Thank you.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much, Tom.